We got COFFEEHOUSE CRIME, man. I ain't never reacted to COFFEEHOUSE, man. We're gonna see what he's like. If I like him, y'all gonna see me more reactions to him. That being said, let's go ahead and get the video started. How's y'all Thursday going? You feel me? Hopefully I have a good Thursday, you feel me? So go ahead and get into the video.
Weiser was an aspiring student with lofty ambitions, settling at the University of Texas to achieve not one but two separate degrees. But after messaging a friend that she was on her way home from campus, she would suddenly disappear. Haruka failed to show up for class the next morning, and as her silence persisted, concern around the campus grew. And sadly, all efforts and search parties would end up discovering a terrible tragedy and a very disturbed individual.
A nigga.
Welcome back to COFFEEHOUSE CRIME, folks. My name is Adrian, and today we're looking at the chilling case of Haruka Weiser. Now, there are various aspects in this case that make it quite difficult to come to an ultimate...
Bro, it's Mr. Ballin' and that chapter in one. Y'all peep the wardrobe. That chapter and Mr. Ballin' in one. I fuck with it.
Conclusion 2. So, with that in mind, I'll let you form your own opinion at the end. Before we begin, and just let you know that I post true crime and strange cases here weekly, and the best way you can support me is by subscribing to the channel. So, if you want to see more darkly fascinating stories or more videos of Nero, then please subscribe now. And now, with that said, please grab yourself a coffee, pull up a seat, and get ready for the deep dive. This is the case of Haruka Weiser. Welcome back to the Lone Star State, folks. And of course, if you're not familiar with this nickname, I'm talking about Texas again. Formerly known as a state filled by cowboys and rodeos, it has long since moved past that era and is now better known as an urban and contemporary place to be. Though, saying that, they do still celebrate their own traditional roots from time to time. Today, we're zoning in on the state's capital city, Austin. Now, we can all assume that when it comes to finances, this city is extremely economically rich, with the likes of Amazon, Apple, Facebook, and Google all having major offices here. Both wealth and quality education are in abundance here, with 52% of adults in the local area having achieved a bachelor's degree or above, while the rest of the nation sits at an average of just 13%. One of these young adults pursuing such an education was Haruka Weiser, an 18-year-old freshman studying at the University of Texas. She had recently moved to Austin to begin the challenge of not one, but two bachelor's degrees. Moving into her younger years, Haruka was born on June 20th, 1997, in Portland, Oregon. She was surrounded by an extremely loving family of 5, including her father, Thomas Weiser, mother, Yasuo Tsunamine, younger brother, Naburo, and sister, Naomi. As you may have guessed, Haruka came from an American-Japanese family, with all 3 children sharing both Western and Eastern names to honor their heritage. For example, Haruka's full name was actually Haruka Juliana Tsunamine Weiser. Haruka's family were very close with one another, often going on tropical family holidays together, and this solid, stable, and happy upbringing was everything Haruka needed to be set up for success. She excelled in elementary school, and moving into her high school years, was particularly proficient in both math and science. Her successes made her family extremely proud, and to those on the outside, she was known to be multi-talented and a very ambitious young girl. Moving into her teenage years, Haruka found her calling in the realms of both dance and theatre. At the age of 12, she would beg her parents to send her to ballet lessons, and seeing the passion in her eyes and pleas, they took her to her first classes when she turned 13. This changed everything for the young girl, and although she had found her real passion, she was still able to keep up with her studies. She was very bubbly and proud, with a highly fulfilling life. To add to this, she also had a rich friendship group, interesting hobbies, fantastic grades, and a
I don't care, I don't see nothing bad going on in the story so far.
loving family. Upon graduation, she decided to follow her passions as well as her academics, enrolling in the University of Texas to join studying both theatre and arts and a pre-med course, in hopes of one day becoming a doctor. Naturally, her family and friends were sad to see her move down to the southern states. They had all graduated and travelled across the country together, but now it was time for her to strike out on her own. And so, at the beginning of her academic year in 2015, Haruka found herself in both strange and uncharted territory. But rising to the challenge, she established herself very quickly here, making new friends and appearing in a few of the university stage plays in her very first year. But all that would change on April 4th, 2016. With Haruka deeply passionate about her studies, it was quite strange when she failed to show up to class that morning. The situation became more suspicious when she failed to show up to all of her other classes that day too. And as the day progressed, others grew more concerned. Neither her teachers or her friends could get a hold of Haruka, and so, taking matters seriously, they found a missing persons report to the local police department. An extensive search of the local area began, beginning at her halls of residence, to which, no surprise, there was no answer. To add to that, her housemates couldn't tell if she returned home that night or not. As the day crept by, there was still no sign of Haruka. With that in mind, the authorities expanded their search past the campus, and shortly after they did, they found a chilling discovery. Following the route that Haruka likely took home from class, her friends were able to trace the walk she had took home the night prior, and looking at the time she sent her last message, she would have walked it at roughly 9:30 p.m. after sundown. This route would have left her quite vulnerable along her journey. Knowing this, Haruka made sure to message her housemates whenever she left dance class. But worryingly, she had become radio silent after that message on the night before she failed to show up to class. Found behind the university's alumni building was Waller Creek, which is a picturesque stream spanning across the campus. And after search parties combed the area, they came back with some very terrible news. A young woman had been found dead, with obvious signs of trauma located across her body. She was partially clothed and wedged between two boulders at the edge of the stream, covered in foliage. A tow rope was found tied around her neck, indicating a possible cause of death. Authorities would also find a pair of glasses and a hammer, both of which were suspected of being linked to the crime. The body was assumed to belong to Haruka from the outset, and unfortunately, positive profiling would later confirm these worst fears. Based on forensics, it was estimated that she'd been carelessly dumped in the creek roughly 24 hours before her discovery. But what truly happened to her was yet to be revealed. With Haruka's killer unknown and still at large, authorities issued an alert to the university and all of its students. In response, all students made sure to travel in groups and keep their wits about them. After carefully reviewing Haruka's movements on the night that she disappeared, the school was able to determine the route that she would have likely taken home. And luckily, that route was partially covered by surveillance cameras. And one of those cameras captured an individual walking and riding on what authorities believed was a red or pink woman's bike, with a backpack on their back. To try and identify
A nigga.
by this person, this footage was released to the public. And although nobody would come forward with a positive identification, Haruka's friends later claimed that the duffel bag seen with the suspect likely belonged to her. After seeing the surveillance footage, which was released by the police department, the Austin Fire Department made a worrying connection. On the same night that Haruka was murdered, a fire had broken out at a storage facility found on Medical Arts Street. And after attending the scene, this fire was deemed to be arson. Located in one of those storage units was a man who was hoping not to be found. And based on the contents around him, it looked like he'd been squatting there for quite some time. He told the fire department that he was burning things to help keep himself warm, which, to be fair, is quite common for homeless people in that local area, especially in the colder months. Since he was only 17 years old, he was taken down to the local Lifebox shelter for the homeless. However, after reviewing that surveillance footage, firefighters recognized him to be that guy. After returning to the scene of the fire, detectives found that red bike seen in the surveillance footage, alongside a boot, a burned college notebook, and a black jacket. And after looking inside the jacket's pocket, they found a receipt with Haruka's details on it, therefore linking her death to the fire and the man behind it.
Well, damn.
No doubt, this evidence made it incredibly hard to dispute a connection between Haruka and the homeless teenager, and so, in response, the authorities travelled to the Lifeworks shelter to find their guy. Surprisingly, the young man was still there when they arrived. But then again, when you have nowhere to go, you likely cling on to any comfort you can find. The 17-year-old man was eventually identified to be Mikhail Kreiner, who previously lived in Texarkana, found more than 300 miles away. Mikhail was initially arrested on charges of tampering with evidence due to the fire, but after receiving a warrant to search his belongings, investigators found a MacBook with a Portland sticker on it, this sadly matching the description of Haruka's laptop. And so, with this fresh information in mind, his arrest was upgraded from tampering with evidence to suspected murder. In a press conference on April the 8th, the Austin Police Department announced that they had a suspect in custody, and, pending some advancements, planned to charge him with first-degree murder. But now that we know that Mikhail was involved in Haruka's death, who exactly was he? What had brought him to Austin, and what was his motive? Well, the information at hand is fairly patchy, but Mikhail was born in the year 2000 to his mother, who remains unnamed. Sadly, this is just another case that includes terrible parenting, as Mikhail's mother was not the supportive or nurturing type. Instead of the health of a child, she was more preoccupied with her addiction to drugs and alcohol, which sadly means that her son Mikhail was born with fetal alcohol syndrome. Fetal alcohol syndrome severely affects brain development at an early age, and can even make the newborn baby go through withdrawal symptoms after birth. No matter how many times I hear that fact, I still can't wrap my head around it. For his own safety, and due to her destructive lifestyle, Mikhail was taken away from his mother as soon as he was born. Sadly,
I didn't even know that. That's crazy.
children in these unfortunate circumstances rarely have a safe, stable, or supportive lifestyle ahead of them, and often struggle to turn things around. This would be no different in Mikhail's case. Throughout his childhood, he was thrown around between his grandmother's place and foster homes, both of which he faced severe abuse. It also became evident that, due to his birth conditions, his development was extremely stunted. I mean, for one, he took much longer to learn how to talk, and as for his education, he had to be held back multiple years. Although we don't quite know what happened during his foster care, it is sadly not uncommon for abuse to occur here. And as for his grandmother, the police were called to her property multiple times. The worst incident was in the year 2009, when neighbours had to call the police after seeing Mikhail's grandmother beating him in the front yard. As a result of the attack, both of his eyes were swollen shut. Excluding his terrible actions as an adult, I feel so sorry for Mikhail as a child. To lose your mother, fall behind in school, and then be beaten by your grandmother amongst everything else is honestly awful. he must have felt so small. By the way, I am not justifying his actions, but in an effort to better understand what happened, we have to understand his childhood.
Definitely, Jeff finna say, you can't justify that shit.
Mary claimed that she was merely disciplining him, despite not actually being able to give any reason why. And although she was arrested after this, she was later released with a $2,000 fine. Despite the obvious physical abuse, Mikhail claimed that his grandmother raised him well and that she was a sweet and kind woman. It is important to note here that, during his period of foster care, Mikhail was diagnosed with autism, depression, and schizophrenia. And despite this diagnosis, all of these would not be medically managed. Neighbors would watch him wander around his grandmother's property, behaving like he was fighting off invisible people. And while this could be just him playing by himself or a sign of loneliness, it could also be a symptom of his schizophrenia. As a teenager, his sisters claimed that he could be sweet and often looked on the brighter side of life. In fact, this image in Texas high school newspapers shows how he was trying to move past his hardships and find a better life. Although his sisters would say he was usually a good kid, he was also quick to snap at any moment. By the way, this is a telltale sign or symptom of autism. However, this cycle of abuse damaged the boy massively. His unloving grandmother told him to leave the home and find his own way in life. And so, at the young age of just 16 years old, Mikhail was officially homeless. Following the terrible news, he walked and hitchhiked 370 miles all the way to Austin. And then, after arriving, he aimlessly wandered the streets, slept at halfway houses, and found sheltered accommodation wherever he could. And then, of course, we know that this all came to a head on the night of April the 3rd, 2016. Once Mikhail was arrested, he didn't have much to say. A psychological evaluation would find that his intelligence was far below that of an average 17-year-old boy, and would further confirm his previous diagnosis of autism, depression, and schizophrenia, saying that he was found to be of sound mind, and furthermore, was aware that his actions were both wrong and punishable. I mean, otherwise, he wouldn't have tried to hide her body or burn her belongings. With a combination of physical evidence and surveillance footage, authorities could go ahead and piece together what exactly happened on the night of April the 3rd. It was at 9:30 p.m. that Haruka left her dance class. After finishing up, she messaged a friend to say that she was on her way, taking her usual route between university and her accommodation. A surveillance camera captured Mikhail lurking around a van parked along this route. It is believed that his initial motive was to break into this van. However, when Haruka descended the hill, his attention turned towards her instead. They were the only two in the area. The surveillance footage shows Mikhail putting the kickstand of the bike down before following her down the path as she made her way back home. It isn't known if he made any advancements prior, but what we do know is that along the way he attacked her. And sadly, at a height of 6'2", she stood no chance. Tragically, she was then sexually assaulted before being murdered by strangulation via the tow rope found on her body. Even to this day, nobody actually knows where this tow rope came from. It could be that this was premeditated and he planned to use it for some sort of crime, or simply that he'd found it along the way. Haruka was then dragged down the riverside by the rope before being stuffed between two boulders and hidden with debris and foliage. Mikhail then returned back the way he came, collected his bike, and then left the scene. A while later, he could be seen walking his bike alongside him as if he was tired or had hurt his leg. From here, we can only assume that he returned to the storage unit with Haruka's possessions in hand. He likely slept there overnight, and in the morning, realizing the severity of his actions, decided to try and get rid of the evidence. That is when the fire department picked him up and took him to a homeless shelter, where, of course, he was then arrested the very next day. The legal proceedings of this case are both long and complex, and frustratingly show a level of neglect that you rarely see in homicide cases. You see, Mikhail was officially indicted in June 2016 for murder, robbery, attempted kidnapping, and sexual assault, and his trial date was then set for March of 2017. However, that initial date was then cancelled after it was learned that there was a massive problem with the DNA profiling of this case. Following inexperienced and untrained staff, the police department's forensic labs were closed in July 2016. This meant that only 20 samples could be processed every single month, leaving the police department with a massive backlog. Due to so much time passing before they could be processed, most of the DNA evidence was eventually scrapped, and these samples were unfortunately now deemed invalid in court.
Man accused of killing a UT freshman nearly 2 years ago is delayed again. Mikhail Kreiner is charged with capital murder in the death of Haruka Weiser. Today, his attorneys say the trial is delayed at least until May because...
Let's be honest right now. Off topic. Y'all know I come to y'all on honesty. They finna get this the key. I mean the key to the under jail and the under. I just thought about it. Man, this man just killed a white woman. But they finna give you the book. Why they finna give him the...
They are waiting on DNA results and scheduling conflicts. Since Kreiner was 17 at the time of Weiser's death, he is not eligible for the death penalty.
Eventually, Michael's trial was rescheduled for July of 2018, and with capital murder charges on his name, if convicted, he was facing up to life in prison with a minimum sentence of 40 years behind bars. But lucky for him, due to his age of 17 years, he was spared any potential death penalty. A jury consisting of 7 women and 5 men were shown the various pieces of evidence gathered by the police, which included the tow rope, Haruka's clothing, and various belongings. One of the most damning pieces of evidence available was Mikhail's prescription glasses, which were found in the stream right next to where Haruka's body was found. His practitioner would confirm that these were in fact his glasses, and that, furthermore, his prescription was particularly unique. Of course, the surveillance footage which captured
That nigga gone.
Mikhail following Haruka was also very important, even if it could only be classed as circumstantial evidence. Mikhail strongly denied killing Haruka, and claimed that, at the time of her death, he was actually to hospital charging his phone, though there is no evidence to back this up. He also claimed that he found Haruka's bags along his way home, and being homeless, he picked them up to see if anything valuable was inside. Being homeless, he couldn't afford a good lawyer, and so decided to represent himself in court instead, which, by the way, very rarely goes well. Once all the evidence had been laid out, the jury went away to decide on a verdict. Now, you would think that they'd come to an immediate decision, but with much of the evidence being circumstantial, it would take them more than 10 hours to decide. It is undeniable that Mikhail was present at the time of Haruka's disappearance, and it seems like the campus was mostly deserted at the time of her murder too. Eventually, after a rather long and grueling debate amongst the jury, Mikhail Kreiner was found guilty of the murder of Haruka Weiser. The judge therefore sentenced him to life in prison, with a minimum term of 40 years before he will be eligible for parole. Haruka's family were in attendance at the trial, and following the sentence, her father Thomas said the following: "Haruka did not choose to sacrifice herself. You made that decision for her, but she did not die in vain. We will never know how many lives she has saved through the events of her death. She was the first victim in what you hoped would be a long run of unsolved murders." Mikhail was silent when his verdict was read out, and showed no emotion when Thomas described him as an aspiring serial killer. And with both of these invisible actions, the troubled young man showed a complete lack of remorse for his crime. Again though, it would be negligent of me not to highlight the learning difficulties and mental health issues that Mikhail was facing. And I think it's that aspect which makes this case both complex and unique to the rest of my videos. Now, there is no excuse for murder under any circumstances. Mikhail showed intention to kill and was aware of his actions, and for that, he absolutely deserves punishment. But with a traumatic childhood, learning difficulties through fetal alcohol syndrome, and various mental health conditions including autism, depression, and schizophrenia, I don't know, that does make the sentencing quite difficult. I think in short, it's quite difficult to decide if he belongs behind bars or in a psychiatric hospital. Now, some say that the police even planted this crime on him, but let's be realistic here. There is plenty of evidence to disprove this.
Plenty of evidence.
In March of 2020, Mikhail appealed his sentence, claiming that the seizure of his items from the storage unit was unreasonable of officers. No surprise, his appeal was ultimately rejected. He will now be kept behind bars for the majority of his life, or at least until he is 57 years old. The loss of Haruka Weiser shook the community surrounding Texas University, and many vigils and memorials were held in honor of her short yet rich life. On every anniversary of her death, flowers are laid in the spot where she was found. In response to her murder, the school invested $13 million into increasing campus security. This includes more effective and frequent lighting, an increase in patrol officers, and additional surveillance cameras right across the campus. Haruka Weiser was a much-loved, talented, and charming young woman with a real zest for life, and she made a real impact on all of those who met her. Her close friends got matching tattoos in her honor, which just goes to show how much she meant to them, and obviously, her family still miss her greatly to this day.
R.I.P. man. First time we at the Coffee House, man. I fuck with your Coffee House, man. If y'all like Coffee House, y'all comment down below, man. We're gonna start reacting to Coffee House from now on out. That being said, this video was wild. Ain't gonna lie. But it definitely needed some help for real. To be honest, cause all the evidence was there, and he did everything in front of the camera. So, and I mean that's case closed right there. It's by itself. That being said, give me a thumb, like, share, subscribe. See y'all motherfuckers on the next video. Let's ride, man.
Don't drop it low, the bill gon' let it blow. Friend head down to your toe, don't wipe it low. The way little buddy got dead, you would think he had a cold. Gon' zip him up, cause I can get you touched, no matter what city you in. From the east to the west, we walk 'em and gun 'em down. Big low, big P for real. I be in the church late night, thinking with some killers that bang for P for real. Say free the boozy, my dog he doing life.